next up, we have such an amazing guest. I tell you, the more I learn, so I found Jennifer Holmgren on my own when I was looking for someone who I thought would be a really amazing keynote for this conference. And the more I learn about her, the more inspired and intimidated I am. So let me just tell you a little bit about our next speaker, Jennifer Holmgren. So Dr. Jennifer Holmgren is CEO of LanzaTech, a company which develops a whole platform of chemicals and fuels, but what we're pretty excited about right now is that they're developing the world's first alternative jet fuel derived from industrial waste gases. So that's pretty exciting. Maybe she'll eventually relieve us of our guilt when we fly on airplanes. Prior to LanzaTech, Jennifer was the Vice President and General Manager of Renewable Energy and Chemicals Business Unit at UOP, which was a Honeywell company. And there, among other things, she helped drive leadership in low carbon aviation biofuels. So this is something Jennifer's been working on a long time. Jennifer is the author or co-author of 50 US patents, more than 30 scientific publications. And Jennifer, you have so many awards that I was like, I can't list all of these awards because there's too many. So I'm just going to list a couple that are maybe most recent. So Jennifer got the Global Bioenergy Leadership Award in 2018. She got the William C. Holberg Award for Lifetime Achievement in Advanced Bioeconomy in 2020. And in 2021, she received the Edison Achievement Award and the Prix Voltaire Award. Jennifer, you got to leave some awards for the rest of us, or not me, but for the other innovators out there. She got her MBA from University of Chicago, her PhD from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to hear what you have to say, and I will turn it over to you now, Jennifer.
Thank you, Melissa. It's really an honor. I was really very grateful when you reached out to me to give me this opportunity to share what we're doing and my thoughts on innovation with the team. So thank you so much, Melissa. So let me tell you about my journey. I'm Colombian, and I was born in Barranquilla, Colombia. And the first time I really started thinking about climate change really seriously was around 2012, while I was working on alternative fuels, I read an article about my home country, Colombia, not being a coffee grower by the year 2050 if climate change continued and abated. And for me, that was my aha moment, because it really told me what we now know, which is that climate change is a fundamental change to our ecosystem, to our way of life, and that it will happen in our lifetimes. I'm planning to be around in 2050. So it was really, for me, a wake-up call. I don't think we need to discuss that anymore, because in less than 10 years, it's become blatantly clear how quickly and how urgently we need to change our carbon economy. And the problem is that we talk about the need to bend the carbon curve, the need to reduce emissions by 8% year over year between now and 2030. But if you look at this, you'll see that even during COVID, when we literally shut down our economies, we still increased our carbon emissions. So this is a very, very difficult problem. And part of the reason is that literally everything we use in our daily lives, not just the power, not just fuels, but all of our material world comes from fossil carbon. This is my rescue greyhound, her collar, her foam, the toys, everything comes from fossil carbon. And it's all produced at centralized refineries, which take advantage of the fact that oil is the densest liquid known to man. And therefore you can move it around across the world and then send it to a centralized production facility that processes on the order of 200,000 to 300,000 barrels of petroleum every single day. To really change how we think about this, we really need to convince ourselves that all carbon is precious, and we need to lock it all away and only take it out when we absolutely need to. Power can be carbon-free. Levelized cost of electricity from renewable power is now equivalent in most jurisdictions to that of fossil carbon. However, our material world and the dense hydrocarbon liquids we use as things like aviation fuel are going to need carbon for a long time. Carbon is all of the products we use. It's in the clothes we wear. It's in the fuel that we fly. It's literally our material world, and it is us. The problem is not carbon. The problem is where our carbon comes from. How we source, how we utilize, and how we dispose of carbon is really what we need to fundamentally disrupt. And at LanzaTech, I believe, there's enough carbon above ground to make everything, absolutely everything we need. But to do that, we need to use carbon that is normally found in emissions before it goes out the flue and is diluted in our atmosphere. And we need to use solid carbon, and we need to create a steady state where we're using these flue emissions and circular carbon and solid carbon to power our circular economy. Okay, at this point, everybody thinks I'm a lunatic. I'm not. Oh, maybe I am. But we have already commercially operating plants that recycle industrial gas emissions, and we are taking that industrial emission and turning it into all these things you see here. These are actual products literally made from what would have been an emission at a steel mill in China. And you mentioned, Melissa, aviation fuel. Aviation fuel is one of those examples. We flew a Virgin Atlantic flight from Orlando to Gatwick, powered by what would have been emissions at a steel mill. So let me tell you how we do that. We've developed a process, and it's 18 years and over $500 million of investment to get to where we are. So not an easy road for us or for anybody. And what we do is we ferment gases. We take carbon emissions, carbon monoxide, hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and we literally pump it into a bioreactor, and we have a bacteria that eats it and makes ethanol. This chemistry happens in seconds. So unlike conventional fermentation, where what you do is you put a batch fermenter, go away for days or months, depending upon what you're making, we literally pump gas in and pump product out. It looks just like a refinery. And we make ethanol. What do we make it from? I've already mentioned industrial emissions, steel mill gases rich in carbon monoxide, refinery gases rich in carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and carbon monoxide, etc. We can use solids, but we have to turn them into a gas. So we gasify them with partner technology. Our core is the fermentation. We've focused on our core. We do not try to do other things that we're not good at. And so we have partnered with a number of gasification companies who can take agriculture solids, who can take municipal solid waste, turn it into a gas that we can feed into our unit. And of course, I mentioned we could convert CO2. As long as we have hydrogen, we can convert CO2, whether that's CO2 directly air captured or CO2 at a flue. As long as you've got hydrogen, we're good to go. And it's the same basic technology at the center. The world doesn't need a lot of ethanol. I hope the world's transitioning to electric vehicles. However, the world has the ability to use ethanol as an intermediate to make ethylene, which is really how most of our raw materials are made. We've developed a technology to take that ethanol to sustainable aviation fuel. I show protein there because in this bioreactor, the bacteria is alive and dividing, and we don't want it to plug this bioreactor. So what we do is we pull the bacteria out and we dry it and we sell it as animal food. It's 90% protein, waste no carbon. Obviously, no matter how you derive that jet fuel, sustainable or not, we have to start to think about seriously how we then capture the back-end emissions. As long as you've got a hydrocarbon, you're going to have back-end emissions. And of course, no matter how you make your material, no matter how you make that Zara dress, you need to make sure that you put it back into the cycle. It's really about creating a circular carbon economy that utilizes all the carbon that's already above ground. We have 4 fully operating commercial plants. The first one that started up in 2018 that I showed you in the first picture, and 3 additional plants at ferroalloy mills. These 4 plants are in China. Our first plant is RSP certified and ISCC Plus certified. This is quite important because if you're working with a brand, it's important to have validation that your life cycle savings, etc., have been audited. ISCC Plus certification is for materials use, like making a dress, and ISCC Corsia is certification to enable you to put that in aviation fuel. So very happy to have these fully operating plants. We have 2 more that are starting up outside of China. The first one is in India. It has started up. It is using a refinery off gas. It's with Indian Oil at their refinery in Panipat. And we also have a plant starting up in Ghent in Europe, using a steel mill gas, and actually it's just started up. 6 commercial operating plants by the end of the year. What do our plants look like? They literally look like a refinery. This is what you're looking at here. Orange is the pipe that comes in from the steel mill with the gas. Those are the 4 bioreactors in the background. Wastewater treatment is that big circular unit. They don't recover the protein for animal food here. They do an anaerobic digestion. That's why the wastewater is so large. And then they use that digested biogas to make power, green power. Here's a bit of drone footage showing you the plant so you get a close-up view. But at the end of the day, we need to get to gigatons. And these 6 plants are going to abate 500 tons of CO2 annual capacity, which is significant. Don't get me wrong, nothing to sneeze at, but it's not gigatons, and we need to get there. And we are going to be producing 300,000 tons of CO2. I told you it took us 18 years to get here. We in the process industry call this crossing the valley of death. To really put a large commercial plant in the ground, $100 million worth of investment, you've got to build demos, you've got to build pilots, and these things take a tremendous amount of time. And then, of course, you've got to diffuse the technology. Takes time, and every step takes more money, which is why everybody calls this the valley of death. I'm happy to say we've crossed the valley of death. We have commercial plants running, but we need to now get to the point where we've deployed enough plants that we actually have created the market and continue to drive down costs. It's like solar, right? The first X number of years, in the case of solar, 30 years, we're about developing the technology and getting the cost down. And now it's about deployment and going faster and continuously improving the technology to get the cost down, to make it competitive. We just went public on NASDAQ. We're listed now, and we're trying to show the world really what is possible when you recycle carbon. We're building plants across the world. I've mentioned the ones that are going to be running by the end of the year, but we have quite a few plants that were either in design or construction. And importantly, what we do is we license our technology. And because we license our technology, I mean, we have to be asset light, right? We're a small company. We can't build $100 million facilities across the world. So we instead license the technology, and the people who build the plants, like ArcelorMittal or our partner Shougang in China, put the capital to build the facility. However, often somebody who's making steel doesn't really want to deploy capital to ferment the gases. And so we've partnered with Brookfield, an infrastructure fund, a global infrastructure fund that is focused on climate tech, and with Olayan in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to impact the Middle East, Brookfield to impact North America and Europe. And the point is they will help us in the case where the partner does not want to build the plant themselves. If it makes economic sense, they will provide the financing to build the plant, and they will also potentially be owners and operators. This is quite important because we're marrying 2 industries, one that produces emissions and one that does a process to convert those emissions. And sometimes that's a tough interface, and getting that finance is tough. And so having somebody who's done due diligence on us and is prepared to deploy capital based on our technology is exciting, and is a model that will help us scale faster over the next few years. We have focused on commodity chemicals. We really feel that if we want to bend the carbon curve, we need to deliver materials that actually can make significant reductions in carbon emissions. And these have to be materials that are largely used, whether it be aviation fuel or whether it be apparel. We focused on ethylene from ethanol, and our next molecule that we'll be commercializing is propanol, isopropanol, which can be used to make polypropylene. And of course, polypropylene is how medical plastics and durable applications of plastic are used. These are massive markets. Usually biology has its day in making fine chemicals, but that is important, and that is what biology is known for doing. But we want to go after commodities, which means we've spent a lot of time driving the unit economics to the level where we can become competitive, or at least not massive premium over commodity chemicals. Let's talk a little bit about a couple of the industries we're tackling. Let's talk about apparel. Most people think about fuels and power as being the big bite that they have to take, to reduce carbon emissions. But the apparel industry is literally 8% of our global emissions. And we've partnered taking the steel mill gas, converting it to ethanol, and then with our partners making polyester. And we've partnered with companies like H&M Move, like Adidas, like Craghoppers, to make polyester-based products. And it is really important as I fly through this to consider that this fleece that I'm showing you here, literally the polyester was made from carbon monoxide that was going to end up going out the flue as both CO2 and particulate emissions. And we recycled them, and we're able to turn it into something that you can wear. Aviation fuel, as Melissa mentioned, is also a very important industry, and one that accounts for 2% of global carbon emissions. Aviation industry uses 100 billion gallons of aviation fuel every year, and sustainable aviation fuels, hydrocarbon, the density of hydrocarbons is how we imagine flying a plane from Orlando to Gatwick, going over the pond, if you will, in the next decades. Obviously, electric aviation will have an important role to play in short haul, but it will be a while because before that impacts long haul. And the same thing with hydrogen and other things that people are talking about today. So really our focus is how to displace fresh fossil carbon in aviation fuel. We did a tremendous amount of work on aviation fuel. And what we did is we developed with Pacific Northwest National Lab and the DOE an alcohol ethanol to jet route. And we worked with ASTM and the airline companies and the engine companies to get that fuel certified for commercial flight. And we flew a commercial plane from Orlando to Gatwick. This is after we landed. So this was also made from steel mill gas, this ethanol, and again, using pollution to make products. What we have focused on is creating an ethanol economy from waste and then bolting that on to the ability to convert that ethanol to aviation fuel. As Melissa said, aviation's in my heart. Actually, my father was a mechanic for Colombian airline Avianca. And so my love for aviation is long and durable. But to really scale LanzaJet, which is not a biochemical process, very different than what we do. While we focused on our knitting, while we focused on fermentation, we decided to launch LanzaJet as a separate company. We received investment from the people listed below. We got a grant from Breakthrough Energy Catalyst. We got a loan from Microsoft at their cost of of debt, not at ours, which really impacts the unit economics. We use that capital. We're building a 10 million gallon sustainable aviation fuel facility in Georgia. The Department of Energy is one of our key partners, and this plant should be mechanically complete later this year. I'm very excited to have this plant up and running. Going back to the process, I want to talk a little bit about solid waste. And like I said, no matter how you make that Crag-Hopper's fleece, you're going to have to recycle the emissions back. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about solid waste. Tremendous amount of carbon, including tires and apparel, that in our minds could be used to recycle. There's a ton of carbon, tons of carbon locked in here that can be used. And all we need to do is couple it with a gasifier and then use the same fermentation process. But thinking about how to make this happen, the reality is that municipal solid waste is quite variable. And so the carbon-hydrogen ratio changes tremendously. Thermocatalytic processes cannot handle this. Biology can, because biology interpolates, just like we do when we're driving, just like we've taught self-driving cars to do. We interpolate our physical environment. And so here's data from our MSW plant in Japan and our China steel mill plant, and you can see the inconsistent carbon input, and you can see the continuous ethanol output. So this is actually a very important difference between thermocatalysis and biologists. I am a thermocatalytic chemist, but this is really game-changing. And the reason for this is because organisms have to survive. And so, for example, if you only have carbon monoxide, then the organism will make hydrogen from water so that it can make the metabolites ethanol so that it can continue to live. If you have CO2, it can't make hydrogen. You have to input hydrogen, and you can use every gas in between. When it comes to solid waste, we've done quite a bit of work since 2013 at a 15 ton per day plant. 15 ton per year plant. We've now running a 500 ton per year plant, and we're building a commercial plant with our partner in Japan that will convert 25,000 tons per year. We're also working with Bridgestone on end-of-life tires, with Nextchem in Rome, and with Tadweer in the Middle East, in UAE, to convert waste carbon into products. So what I've talked about is basically the original circular economy, right? Nature wastes nothing. Everything is reused. And so, but this is industrial biotech. This is really industrial biotech. But the power of biology is not from industrial biotech. The power of biology is from synthetic biology. What I've shown you how to do is fundamental, but the ability to genetically modify an organism, to reprogram it, to push carbon in different directions to make other products, that is game-changing to the chemical industry. And so today we make ethanol, we convert it to ethylene, and then we use conventional path to make polyester. The reality is that what we've already shown we can do at a laboratory scale is skip all those steps and go directly to MEG and then take that MEG to polyester. So now we're able to create a future that's distributed, where only one process is required to make a product. Done the same thing with tires, ethanol to butadiene, butanediol to butadiene, paths that shorten the cycle. We've also been able to make isoprene, which of course is the substitute for natural rubber. Butadiene is a substitute for rubber, but there are applications that require natural rubber, and in those cases, isoprene is a better substitute. What's really exciting is that once you've built a commercial plant, you are able to then put a different microbe. Unlike thermocatalysts, where you have to have the specific reactor tailored to the catalyst, in biology, that reactor is not tailored except to your specific microbe. And if that microbe is reprogrammed to make other molecules, Doesn't matter. Now you can shut down and 10 days later you'll be up and running, making a different molecule. This is game changing in the way we think about the chemical industry. And of course, now we're taking emissions and capture them, sequestering them into products that we use every day. I obviously believe in technology. Um, I believe that technology changes the way we see the world and allows rapid transformation. And I believe that's how we'll bend the carbon economy. And that's how we'll transition from these fossil-derived, centralized production facilities to distributed facilities that change our way of life. And in the process industry, the ability to number up, to build identical replicate units where the waste resource is up versus bringing a resource like petroleum into a centralized facility, I believe is how products will be made in the future. And hopefully I've convinced you that this is possible and that it's already happening. And but Mr. Fuller said, we're not going to bend the back of that carbon curve by nibbling away at the edges. We're going to need to fundamentally change the ecosystem. I divided my talk into two parts. The second part is much shorter, so if you'll bear with me a few minutes, I thought I'd share with you some of my lessons on daring to be the tall poppy. And so let me share something with you. This is actually a prediction that the telephone would never amount to anything. A prediction less than 10 years from Kitty Hawk that we'll never be able to fly. Predictions that we might get a computer down to 1.5 tons and that 640K of memory should be enough. I don't even know anybody under 30 who knows what a K of memory is. So you have to ask yourself, how is it that all of these predictions were so fundamentally wrong? These were brilliant men. The problem is predictions only extrapolate the past. And the reality is that a disruption changes the way we think about things. When Gates said, we don't need more than 640K, he never imagined this. He never imagined the telephone where you would carry literally your life, your pictures, your videos, and everything else. That's what innovation does. It changes what's possible. It makes something that you could never imagine conventional wisdom. So predictions, frankly, are a waste of our time. And when you think about gas fermentation, the number of times we've been told that we cannot scale gas fermentation, it's mass transferred limit, that we won't be able to genetically modify organisms. But that's not true. And so I would urge you that you need to consider not just jumping to the next curve, but becoming the next curve, changing everything. I've been doing aviation fuel since 2006 when I was told that nobody would ever be able to fly on a drop-in replacement to kerosene. And in less than 10 years, in less than 4 years, we went from, you can't do this, to flying the Green Hornet in 2010 using sustainable aviation fuel. We went supersonic. Well, the Navy did. I didn't. I supplied the fuel. But you need to do crazy things. You need to imagine that microbes could actually convert emissions at a steel mill. And you need to be willing to let everybody tell you it's a stupid idea, but not argue with them on every step, because that'll just bog you down. And so sometimes you argue and sometimes you just smile and wave. Sometimes you just keep moving. The fact is that if you dare to do something new, there's always a reason why it's not a good idea and why it's not possible. But the reality, it is possible. You can do it. You can make it happen. But you have to be patient. We have 18 years, $500 million, lots of partners, and lots of data. And we didn't skip steps. That's why it took 18 years. I didn't want to build $100 million commercial boat anchor. And so what we did is we took it step by step. We piloted, we demonstrated, we took it to the next level. But we're running commercially. We work with partners across the world. We're not afraid to work with people that are bigger than we are, who have a different vision. We've developed a platform. It's extensible. It's worth the 500 million and 18 years because it will have application to a lot of feedstocks. But to get here, you have to also be willing to listen to others. You know, our board is 40% women, and it doesn't look like everybody else's board. My team doesn't look like everybody else's team. You know, talent is distributed. Opportunity is not always, but you can create the opportunity for your company. You can change what your team looks like. My executive team, my management team, my team. Everybody is from everywhere and contributes equally. And you have to have your partners be part of your team. They cannot just be the person on the outside. And it can't just be about gender diversity. You have to also measure yourself in racial diversity, generational diversity, everything. You have to worry about everything if you really want talent in your company. And, you know, don't tell me you can't find women engineers or women scientists. 50% of my science team is female. You have to care. You have to motivate yourself by wanting to change something important. And as hard as it is to cross the valley of death, taking a small company and make it economically viable and sustainable, that's not the valley of death. That's the Grand Canyon of death. And so you just got to keep chugging. And so you have to believe in yourself, in your team, and in what you're doing. And I can assure you that I believe that every waste resource, including CO2, will become what we use in our daily lives. We will rethink carbon. It won't just be fossil derived. We will rethink refining. Refining will be about refining waste, about refining CO2. And we will start to learn how to use biology, not just thermal catalysts, to make the things we need. And hopefully now when you look at a label, you'll ask yourself where your carbon comes from, because it doesn't have to always be fossil carbon. As Nelson Mandela said, it'll be impossible until the day you've done it. We will do it, but we will only do it if you join us on a journey, because it's going to take everybody, the scientists, the communicators, the governors, everybody, to create that new carbon economy that recycles carbon to make the things we need. And let me see if I can stop sharing. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, thank you so much, Jennifer. I was muted during your talk, and if I hadn't been muted, you would have heard all the times I went, wow, oh, wow, oh my God. Like I was just reacting to so many of the things you said. You guys have done truly amazing things. I'm actually so excited to follow up with you after this talk too, but we do have some questions from the audience we have to try to get to really quickly. Then just to remind everybody, drop your questions in the Q&A. We are going to take a lunch break at 11:30, and we will come back a half an hour later at noon. But before then, let's try to get to some of these questions real quick. So one of the questions that we got here, and if you don't want to answer a particular question, let me know and I'll pass to the next one. But how does your product, and I'm going to change it to does your product, address greenhouse emissions from the livestock production industry? Are you guys involved in that at all?
No, we're not. We are not right now involved in that. We have the ability to convert biogas, so that is one path to address, but really it's not something we're focused on, and not something we can do easily.
Right. Okay, thank you. Another question we have is a little bit more technical. It's from Gabriel Avgarinos, and he says, is the delay to 2024 for LanzaTech's first USA plant because of tax credits from the IRA? Please discuss.
Yep. So We started by using steel mill gas to make ethanol, and the world does not consider that biology. The US has the renewable fuel standard, and they don't consider that biology. To be biology here, to qualify for the renewable fuel standard, you have to start with sugar, corn, cellulose. And because we were using a waste gas and emission, we didn't qualify for that. So that put us at a disadvantage. And that's why we worked in other jurisdictions where our ethanol was not disadvantaged relative to other ethanol. So our first plant in the US is in part related to the fact that now with the IRA, you get credit for carbon capture, and you get credit for hydrogen use, and you get credit in sustainable aviation fuel production that doesn't have to be from bio feedstocks. And so all those things together allow us to participate here. This, by the way, is a great question because it also allows me to make a comment. If you look at the renewable fuel standard, it is not technology neutral. It imagined a world where ethanol was made from sugar, from corn, from agri-residues. It never imagined that you could use a fossil carbon emission before it was emitted. The low carbon fuel standard in California is technology neutral. It only cares about outcome. Do you reduce the carbon emissions? If yes, you get a credit. If no, you don't get a credit. And so this technology neutral approach, I think is quite important because it allows new technologies, disruptive technologies and approaches to have a seat at the table from the beginning. And so always think about that when you're governing is how do I incentivize the things I haven't thought about today? Because those could have a material impact.
That is such a good point. You just, I'm saying, wow. And again, California leading the charge on a lot of this stuff, which is pretty cool. There's a question I wanted to ask earlier, and it might be hard to answer in this format, but I'm going to give it see if you want to give it a shot. You talked a little bit about the unit economics of producing ethanol in this way. And I think you said something about being close to achieving competitive parity. Could you tell us a little bit more about what it's going to take to make it profitable to make ethanol in this way without carbon tax credits or something like that, like, or can it become profitable without tax credits or other forms of government subsidy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it depends on how we make it. If we make it from just compressing a gas, that's the cheapest. I don't have to add a gasifier or another piece of equipment like an electrolyzer in front of my unit. And that can get, let's say, polyester at a 50 to 60% premium today, okay? Relative to fossil carbon. To get to the 10% premium or something where it's a very small premium, you are going to need carbon taxes. The fossil industry has been around for 100 years. It's really optimized, and we aren't there, and we won't be there for, another 20, 30 years. So to go faster, we really need the externalities of, fossil production conversion to be included in the cost.
Okay, that's really cool. So in a way, you're kind of talking about the ultimate recycling program. And as we've seen, all these municipalities have recycling programs set up, and then sometimes we hear that they're not actually being used. And it's because of the incentives, because of the monetary outcome of doing it. Are there places where you feel like maybe state governments or national governments are doing it better than other places? Getting it right, getting the incentive structure right to deploy this?
That's actually a really good question. The incentive structure is quite interesting. I can tell you more about the things that concern me about what's being done wrong. Okay. So if you put mixed waste into a gasifier in many parts of the world and plastic ends up being gasified, you often then cannot qualify all that waste for products like aviation fuel or biogenic carbon to get renewable fuel standards and things like that. So you're kind of forced to pre-sort. And the theory around that is, well, if you've got a plastic, you can mechanically recycle. But like you said, 80% of plastic isn't being recycled. And so discouraging people from using mixed waste just slows everything down. So the message there is a perfect solution is if I could recycle all the plastic mechanically and the rest of the mixed waste in a different way. That's a perfect solution. And I'd love to get to the end game, but it's not feasible today. So don't prevent the things that allow you to make progress. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Make progress this mixed waste until you're able to sort and do the other things. So, but there are jurisdictions that, I mean, we export our trash, right? At least there are like the island nations like Singapore and Japan at least use their trash for power. And I'd rather use carbon for things, not power, because renewable power is better, but at least it's being used. All of it is being used rather than thrown away, discarded, and shipped to another location.
Yeah. We have a question from Yumiko Kinoshita, who asks, how can we individually work towards ensuring our local wastes are tapping into this renewable flow?
That's a good question. And I don't know that I know the answer to that. I think the kinds of things you can help with individually is advocating for reusing waste rather than just throwing it away, making sure that people know that there are ways to do that. Those are the kinds of things you can do, but boy, I'd love to hear all of you tell me what you think you can do, because I haven't actually thought about that question. I'd love to hear it from you.
So I'm going to, again, exert moderator's prerogative to add a follow-on question to that. I teach innovation strategy. So I was super excited when you started talking about licensing this out so that you could scale more quickly. Do you think it's possible to create a highly decentralized system where you're like, I don't know what the minimum scale is for one of these reactors, but could we have every neighborhood have a local place where we can take our, some category of waste, some waste stream or multiple waste streams, and do something akin to what you're doing? Is that along the path of the licensing and innovation development you see?
I don't dare say that at a community level, I'll get the economics right, but 20 years from now, that could be very different. But near term, city level, municipality level, for sure. And that's, I think, one of the key points is, like you said, license to create this completely distributed carbon economy, local supply chains, taking that carbon, right, and reusing it. And to be honest, trash, and the reason I emphasize trash, is highly motivational. I know for you, Melissa, you brought up the industrial waste, but most people can't relate to industrial waste. But I think people could really relate to their trash, today's trash, becoming, tomorrow's shoe. And so I actually believe this distributed at the municipality level is gonna create the energy around, hey, this I am contributing, this is my stuff. And I'm pretty excited about that level of distributed. We have to make the economics better for sure. Right now, you need incentives to make that happen. And we want to get to a place where that's not required.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me that we spend an awful lot of money and time moving our waste around. So the more we could decentralize that process, we save again on costs, on fuel and things like that. We have another question here from Asia Pia Azraputri that says, Asia is from University of Indonesia. Asia says, I want to ask about the circular economy in Indonesia. It's booming, but the role of MSMEs is still not widely implemented, and maybe some of them already know but do not know how to start. Is that anything you want to speak to?
Can you help me? I'm so sorry. What is an MSME?
I don't actually know either. So Aja, if you want to add to your question, that would be helpful. And we might not get that in time, but is there any last points you want us to take home and really remember, or some call to actions that you think we could start? Oh, micro, small, medium enterprises.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great question. So, we have been working, actually, places like Indonesia, Vietnam actually manufacture a lot of apparel. And so we've been focused on how do we leverage that manufacturing waste. combined with local municipal solid waste, which in some cases is not gathered quite the way we do it, to create jobs, local economy, and to build facilities like this. So I actually think places like Indonesia, that's actually why our project in the Middle East with Ted Weir is such a great opportunity, because this is just an overland waste dump, right, with methane emissions and everything else. So it's really an opportunity in places where we don't have as sophisticated a gathering and sorting and everything else to really have a real impact on climate. So people just need to learn more. And to your question, Melissa, what could each of us do? Each of us just has to focus on this every single day. How do I communicate the message? How to reduce my carbon footprint? How do I teach people not to give up? You know, that there is a different way. How do I call out when somebody challenges? We need allies, right? It's pretty easy for what I'm doing to get attacked, and what we need from everybody is to step in and say, well, you know, we need to do it differently, and what they're doing makes sense, and it will lead to other people doing things that are also different. So you can be an ally in helping to create this new carbon economy.
Okay, well, I'm going to try to be an ally for sure. It's such an inspiration. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. And I hope that we'll get to have you, that you'll be willing to come back and speak to us again sometime.
I look forward to it. Thank you for the invitation. Bye for now.